Hello my friends and welcome back to Philosophy What Makes a Narrative Gaming Masterpiece Part 3, The Last of Us. Last time we discussed the Tomb Raider reboot, and in particular the ludonarrative dissonance that created a gap between Lara's emotional breakdown over killing a deer and the largely remorseless gameplay of killing dozens of enemies. But we also talked about the quality of the rest of the game, along with the many ways that the Tomb Raider closed the dissonant gaps common to many other action-adventure platforming games, and how that engrossed the players so well that they are willing to forgive and even retcon the narrative faux pas. But that was just a single moment in an otherwise masterfully crafted game. The Last of Us, however, while properly having wide acclaim as a masterpiece, especially by my own measure, it had a blaringly obvious aspect of ludonarrative dissonance. But first I want to point out that The Last of Us also fixed many ludonarrative dissonance problems of other stealth games. The particular one that comes to mind is how once enemies are alerted, they don't conveniently decide the player has left after a while and go off alert if they don't see the player. To balance repetitive or unfair gameplay away from that, Naughty Dog made sure that the clicker zombies all had their own predictable behaviors. The key point of ludonarrative dissonance in The Last of Us was not in the narrative as it was with the Tomb Raider, but in the mechanics. Of course, I'm talking about Joel's X-ray hearing. This average single father, old, tired, drunk, but skilled at survival, has developed the superhuman ability to hear vibrations with such precision that he can keep a full and accurate 3D image of anyone who happens to be somewhat near him. In a story that is so much about creating realistic characters, making natural choices in a horrible situation, that the writers chose to take all agency away from the player for the biggest decision of the game, this makes Joel into a character that lacks realism. And so we players ultimately find the character hard to believe. Now, believe it or not, that sort of ability isn't entirely unrealistic. A human echolocation method actually has been developed to help blind people with independent traversal, and people with sight can learn the method too. Link in the description for more info on that. The method has few practitioners and few teachers, and there is nothing to suggest Joel was able to learn this method during his pre-Ellie depression. I'm sure Naughty Dog didn't intend this little fact to be the main canon, but that instead the X-ray hearing mechanic was done, because without it, the game would be extremely difficult and not very fun for the majority of its players. We gamers are used to suspending our disbelief for a lot of things in the name of enjoying the experience for what it is. That is nothing special in terms of getting past ludonarrative dissonance, and really can't even be called an aspect of design, because all game developers, novelists, directors hope that they've created a piece good enough to get the audience to suspend their disbelief. No, Naughty Dog is better than that, and they actually used the presence of that dissonance to overcome it. Rather than creating artificial difficulty with methods like changing damage outputs and increasing enemy health, Naughty Dog created a hard mode out of removing that X-ray hearing completely. It's almost as if someone invented a mod called Realistic Hearing and sent it to Naughty Dog in time for the final release build. Other methods of increasing difficulty that are common to survival horror, like reducing the availability of items and materials, were also present. But controlling the hearing mechanic was where the true genius lies. Having that ludonarrative dissonance as the base game made it accessible and fun. By making hard mode obviously the more realistic experience, it took what would have been a miserable rage game if it were the base experience, and turned it into a challenge and a goal for the player. But beyond that, merely knowing that the dissonant mechanic was a temporary one, to be replaced with a higher skill level attained by beating the original base game, and accepting the challenge of realism, it gave the player an actual in-game reason to motivate the suspension of disbelief. The designers at Naughty Dog knew the ludonarrative dissonance they were creating, and, by controlling its presence and presentation, turned that gap into an enjoyable part of the core engagement. And that ensured that all the other masterful pieces of the design unified into a narrative gaming masterpiece. The next game we're going to take a look at chose what seems to be an entirely different method, in that it didn't try to control its ludonarrative dissonance at all. So join me next week when we take a look at the Dark Souls series. Thank you for watching, and stay true.